I'm not that in love with with my music. And it might sound like a sin, but I truly don't. I mean, I love what I do, but I also love what I learn from other people.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm excited as always to be here with you. This episode sees us talking to the brilliant Otmaro Ruiz. What an hour and a bit this is. I know I talk up every show because all of our guests are amazing. I mean, that's what this show's about. Otmaro's career is literally impossible to encapsulate across an hour. Do check our show notes because you'll see a link to Otmaro's discography. And as I mentioned in the interview, there are literally hundreds of projects that he has worked on, both in a live and studio setting. So it's impossible. And there are some major names we don't even talk about, but we certainly do talk about some great artists, and let alone his perspective on education, AI in music, a whole bunch of different stuff. So yeah, lots and lots to enjoy here. So I'll let you jump in and listen, and I'll talk to you after the show. Otmaro, it's an absolute pleasure and honour to have you on the show, sir. And I do need to kick off asking you, it's a Saturday afternoon your time. Why are you not on your way to a gig?
Oh man, you see that is a very, very, very tricky question. But all I can say is that I'm here with my friend Simon Phillips working on my wife's show, and that takes prevalence above all gigs in on earth. Yeah, we're putting together a show for the record that we just released, and there's a lot of stuff from the record that after I recorded it, I went like, well, how are we gonna do this in a live setting? So we've been kind of like finding out strategies to sample or to trigger certain things, and Simon was helping me with that. So today, whatever gig I had, this is more important.
It is. No, you're a man that knows his place. And I do want to talk about that album. And just for the sake of our audience, I felt the interview had already peaked before we recorded because Otmaro gained assistance from Simon Phillips to adjust his headphones. Doesn't get any better than that. So, yeah, so do tell us about the recent album, Otmaro, and the challenges of getting that into a live context.
Well, this is a sequel to our first album. We have a project called the Lado Brazilian project. It's a beautiful project. It has a very special place in my heart, actually, even if I wasn't married to her. My wife is Brazilian, and she's a wonderful pianist and singer. But most of all, she knows her music very well, the music of her country. She has done extensive research, ethnomusicology studies and stuff. And then she's very, very good at finding these tunes that are like gems that were probably overlooked, that were in a side B of a vinyl somewhere. That's why we call the project Lado B, because it is side B. It's like some of those tunes people never even got to hear. And then it is a reimagination of these tunes. I get to arrange them. I get to reshuffle the harmony. To some people, it might be a little too much, but I mean, they've been the ones that have been done that are standards have been done so many times the same way. So I thought, well, if this is my chance, I'm going to do something completely different. So that's what this project is about, and it's an acoustic endeavor. So it's no electronics involved. I play acoustic piano. I play a very beautiful instrument, French accordina, and then everybody's like nylon guitar, acoustic bass, and we use. I substituted the all the orchestral stuff. I substituted by choirs. I love what the human voice can do to warm up a track. So everything is based out of the choir contribution, and that's where we thought, well, we probably I don't know if the way things are right now, I'm touring with Simon and touring with other people. I didn't even know that we were gonna get to tour so quickly after releasing the album. So all of a sudden we have these dates. It's like, well, we have to play the album. How are we gonna do? In the past, we did it with a real choir, and there's a nice video running around where we have all these people on stage. But this time we might not have that luxury, so that's why we're working on ways to trick it.
That's quite the undertaking. So it's all going well so far. You've
Yes,
not encountered
lovely,
any big hurdles. Yeah.
lovely. Yeah.
No, that's
Of course,
great.
it took a lot of Simon's patience in teaching me the inner workings of this little machine that I got. So I'm a slow learner, but I'll get there.
I'm sure you will. And you've got many years of learning and teaching. So I do want to take a step back initially, Otmaro, to your musical upbringing. So I know I'd love to hear about those early years as a child into your teenage years. And I know your parents had a big impact on your music and that as well. Just tell us a little bit about your musical upbringing.
Well, my parents were total music addicts, but they were not musicians. They were both physicians, actually, and but my mother used to be into opera, and she was a very good singer herself. And my father loved had a very vast knowledge of classical music and film scores. He knew every film score, especially all the John Barry and all the Jerry Goldsmith stuff. He was like really into it. So from early age, that was my that's what I used to listen in my house. Um, and then I decided that I wanted to get into music when I was 7 years old. And by 8, I joined the local national conservatory as a classical guitar player. And I did the whole career, 9 years of classical guitar. In the meantime, I've also thought that I was falling in love with the piano. And towards the end of the guitar career program, I realized that I had a more instant connection with the piano, with the keyboard instruments than the guitar. In other words, I couldn't create music with the guitar. For some reason, there was a, a block there. Someone was blocking that connection. And then I decided, okay, I think piano is going to be the thing. And then I changed instruments and never looked back. Also, I was studying, at the moment, I was also studying biology. And I also left biology. I decided to be a full-time musician.
That's amazing. And so the classical training obviously stands you in incredibly good stead, Otmaro. And I know you moved out to the US. What influence, and I imagine it's huge, what influence did that classical training have on your development through your career in jazz and fusion and everything else that you've done?
Well, I have to admit, I was very young when I decided I want to be a piano player. And I thought I had to spend so much time with the guitar. I thought that I had a lot to catch up with. So I centered my focus in only technique, getting rid of, taking care of as much technical issues as I could. So that was my focus. Like I studied technical books like crazy. I neglected studying classical repertoire, which now I regret because that gives a perspective into certain harmonic processes. But that's a different story. I'm trying to catch up at my age. I'm trying to catch up with that now. But then the technique thing, I realized that whatever you're gonna do, whatever style you're gonna do, the technical issues is what is gonna give you the proper enunciation for the words if you are an announcer. So everything that I did was solved a lot of problems because I went through a progressive rock phase, and progressive rock it demands a lot of piano, baroque knowledge, a lot of classical language. And then by the time I went to the jazz repertoire, the jazz phase, which is what has taken like a bigger part of my life, uh, then the technique what allowed me was to sound clearer, to have a better enunciation in my ideas, which is not a guarantee that it's going to be good, but at least at least what I'm saying is understood. So that's how I view technique.
Absolutely. And I'm going to pick you up on that point you just mentioned about the classical training sort of put forward a certain way of doing harmonics and so on. And you said that you're now playing catch up on that many years later. Just tell us a little bit about how you're approaching that and how you have had to change your style or adjust your style to open things up further.
Well, what I noticed is that as I got into more like composition and trying to develop certain aspects of especially voice leading and voice conduction when I'm playing, when I'm improvising, I realize all that has been already invented. All that language has been around for centuries. So I realized that wow, that one chord, that one texture that I want, Ravel was doing that, and all that sparse stuff that has that ringing of harmonics. Satie already did that, and all that rhythmical stuff. Bartok already did that. So at this point, it's like I go back and I don't have the luxury of studying a whole piece, but I can go and take a score and go to the place where, oh, this is what I'm looking for. This is like that device that I can use it to what I'm doing now. So yeah, of course,
Yeah, no,
if I did it when I was a kid, I wouldn't have that to spend the time now. But hey,
no. No, great response. And so while I was planning on going on to some of your work, and we will get to that, but I think while we're on the education side of things, a great deal of your career has been spent educating others, which is amazing in its own right. How have you developed your approach over years to educating other players? What are some of, I know it's hard in a short interview, but what are some of the core concepts you want a new player to develop to be a successful player?
well, when I teach my students, I don't have the luxury of teaching them how to play the instrument. I hope they already have that solved, especially at a college level. I see a lot of mixed bag of people that get to college knowing a lot of music, but with terrible technical proficiency, and a lot of the other stuff. Guys that can play a million scales, but they don't understand the music. So I don't have the luxury of starting either side from the beginning. I get them wherever they are. So now, am I a good? First of all, the question that I ask myself: I am I a good instructor, a good teacher? I don't know. What I know is that for many years, I have many questions for many years that went unanswered because when I was in Venezuela, we didn't have jazz instructors. We didn't have the luxury of lectures, of master classes that we have now. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have this, that. So now that I can sit one on one with someone and ask them, what would you like to do? Whatever they ask me, I'm ready to tackle that. And as you know, not everybody learns the same way. So I have a lot of students they come from the classical world, and I know how to deal with them because I was in the classical world. So you cannot teach a classical guy the same way that you teach a guy that has developed everything by ear. So you have to go for more formulaic approach, for a more foundational approach based on scale, based on in composition exercises. Uh, and that's how I developed the improvisation on classical people. Is like, okay, let's analyze this melody, this iconic melody, see how it's developing based on certain intervallic stuff. So this is the scale now. Let's do that with that scale. With a jazz guy, I have to do the complete opposite. You know, I have to, just like they already know this stuff. So it's just about, okay, where are we want to get a foundational harmonic so that we can develop more stuff like that. Yeah, so that's the things that I'm always balancing.
Yeah, no, amazing. And have the challenges of teaching changed over the years, and even now in an environment where AI is starting to get a foothold in music, how has the landscape changed as an educator for students?
Well, I could get in trouble, but one of the things is that first of all, the kids nowadays, the amount of information out there is dramatically more magnified to where it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So you get kids that already know more stuff. Now, what I noticed also is that because most of the information is located in the same places, most of the kids go to these sources and then they all pretty much sound the same. Yeah, so I see a lot of this pros and cons. Remember, like only 20 years ago, to learn something, you had to like repeat the same place in the record a million times until it would permeate. And now you just have it there on your screen, and it's already transcribed. You don't even have to do the transcribing process. So I don't know. I think we have exchanged the an expedite way of acquiring information. We have we have that now, but we have sacrificed the uniqueness of how we got our information before.
Yeah, no, great point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, really good point. Um, so I do want to kick off artistically, Otmaro, talking about your career and your output. So it's difficult to even in an hour cover those, let alone everything else you've done. But you've just mentioned your most recent album. And I do want to talk about what I would call your solo album, so Elements, Essentia, Sojourn, and so on. Well, let's go back to Sojourn, probably. Actually, I'm going to go back a bit further to your amazing 1991 album where you play Ryuichi Sakamoto. Now, obviously, being a keyboard podcast, that was one I had to pick up on. Do you recall what the inspiration was there, and probably your relationship with synthesizers and things like that, if there is one for you?
Well, first of all, the relation with synthesizers, I got my first setup when I was still 15, 16 years old, and that was my progressive rock phase, right? So I learned with. I remember my first setup was a Fender Rhodes, a CP70 electroacoustic piano, and I had uh, Poly 6, something like that, if I might remember correctly, and Moog kind of monophonic synth by Yamaha. It was a CS15 Yamaha.
Oh, yeah.
That was my first setup. But what that allowed me was to learn how to like the signal flow, right? Yeah. Understanding how things work, how do you do like with a square wave or a serrated wave, and adding these and the filters and that was my and then by the time I hit the mid '80s, in the mid '80s with FM, I kind of like lost a little bit of that. I fell a little out of love because I couldn't get into it. I couldn't go into that little window and do everything by menus, especially the X7s and all that, right? Yeah. When I arrived in the United States, I didn't bring any keyboards with me. I sold everything in Venezuela, and I was more known as a pianist, And then I arrived here in 1989, and then the contact for this Ryuichi Sakamoto album was I met this person in the next year, basically. And they were looking for someone to do arrangements, solo piano arrangements of Ryuichi's scores. That was the task. It was not understood as a record that was going to be earth-shattering in terms of my career, and I understood that. But first of all, they were surprised that I knew who Ryuichi Sakamoto was. The people from the label was like, "What? You know who Ryuichi is?" He's like, "Of course. I mean, I used to do music for TV and films, so it's like, why not? I mean, he's an iconic name, right?" So immediately they went, "Okay, you are the guy." Bam, bam. And then that was my bargaining chip, and for me to negotiate 2 more albums after that. So I did Ryuichi's album, and then after that, they allowed me to record my first 2 solo albums, Distant Friends and Nothing to Hide.
And let's talk about those. So over your career, your solo albums, I imagine each of them have occurred at a different time and had a different inspiration. But given how busy you are, what itch does doing your own work scratch for you? Aside from obviously your own creative output, what are you able to do across those albums that you may not be able to do elsewhere?
Oh well, the first album, Distant Friends, I took it like, well, this might be it's my first presentation card to the world, right? And I was very young, and it was more like almost like a catalog of things that I can do. I tried to keep within the maturity that I had at that point, whatever, or lack thereof. I tried to keep some kind of like a cohesive product out of the whole, musical product out of the whole thing. But it was very catalog sounding. I wanted people to know that I could do this, and I wanted people to know that I could do this other thing, and solo piano and orchestration and this. And then for the second one, for Nothing to Hide, a different challenge was suggested by the label. It's like, well, I think it was also based on how I burned through the budget in the first one, because I wanted to do so much. So for the second one, it's like, well, do you think you can do something a little more within the budget? Still, they allow me to use the same budget, but why would you like to challenge yourself to do something more effective? So I did this quartet direct to disc, direct to tape. Sorry, direct to digital tape. So we bypassed all the mixing, and it was an incredible experience. Um, and we took it more as a performance kind of CD, more than the production part of it.
Yeah. That's amazing. And so, I mean, you've continued to release albums. As you said, you're working on one with your wife at the moment. I imagine, do you have another solo album after this that you already got? Is there a vault of Otmaro's work waiting to see the light of day?
Yeah. Well, yeah. The thing, okay, after Nothing to Hide, I did a few more records. I forgot the names, but it wasn't until Sojourn, that was recorded in 2008. That record was very important because um, I went back to my focus. I wanted to do my quartet music, as I've been doing it for so long, and I never had the time to really get to it. In the meantime, I was doing all these different projects, and I did one called Latino, which was a trio album with Abe Laboriel and Alex Acuña, but it was not my music. So it wasn't until Sojourn that I got to play my music again. And then after that, I went into a sideman kind of phase that took me away from that momentum, because truly, you know how hard it is when you have a solo project, whatever history you might have, it's not a guarantee of anything. You need so many moving parts for this to be successful, to tour, to, and I was a little frustrated with this, and then I got into my Simon side of things. Then I did a couple of more projects. One is called Elemental, which was again my music, but the electric side, and Essencia, which I always wanted to do an album like Essencia because I'm a big Brazilian music lover, and as a pianist, I grew up listening to Cesar Camargo Mariano, and he did this wonderful, iconic album called Samambaya in the 70s. I always wanted to do something like that. So Essencia is my homage, pretty much, to Cesar Camargo, and and again, it was right after that. My wife, okay, it's time to do our Lado B again. We the first one was in 2015, so it's time to do. So I got involved into the production. We wanted to do it better than the first one, better songs, more developed, a more developed sound. So that's what took me away. And then I realized, wow, it's been 15 years since Sojourn. So it's been 15 years since I can do something that really depicts my real heart as a musician. So I'm sitting, as you say, I'm sitting on probably 30 songs, like 2 or 3 CDs worth of music at the moment that I should document soon before it starts stinking.
Yeah, love it. That's good to know. I can't wait to hear it. No, that's amazing. And look, you've mentioned your sideman phase, which I think is a modest way of alluding to the massive collaborations you've done over the years. So I'm going to cover off a couple, Otmaro, then get you to call out some that have really influenced you. So in no particular order, so this will jump all over timelines. Alex, and sorry for our listeners, I've already warned Otmaro that my Australian accent and some of these wonderful Latin American names I will struggle with, so bear with me. But Alex Acuna,
Yeah,
tell us
yeah.
about your role there and what that brought to your career.
Well, Alex Acuña is an iconic drummer and percussion player. Everybody knows he represents uh, an important chapter in fusion music with his collaboration with Weather Report. Uh, the same night that I arrived in LA, and this is something that I cannot, I mean, I tell people that come here to try luck, right? It's like it might happen or it might not happen. When you move to a town like New York or LA, you just have to be there and wait until it happens. Well, in my case, the night that I arrived in LA, a friend of mine was playing a concert, and Alex was playing in that concert. And I went to that concert almost directly from the airport. I put my luggage in the apartment and I went to the concert. And in the concert, they were playing one of my songs. And they asked me to play with the band. And I played. And from that day, I started playing with Alex.
Wow.
So it's one of those things. It happened, uh, it was not planned. Alex, Alex was a big catalyst in allowing me to get all these relations going in Los Angeles, in the recording circuits, and also in the live shows. And through Alex, I met Abraham Laboriel. They used to have this band called Koinonia. Through Alex, I met Alex, and I mean Abraham, and from Abraham, I met Justo Almario, which is a wonderful saxophone player. And that was my starting point in the Latin jazz community in LA.
Great. And you've mentioned the next two on my list, so Justo, Almario, and Abraham. Let's talk about Abraham, obviously another iconic person bass player, one of the most massive session bassists of all times. Tell us about that relationship and what you learnt there.
Well, with Abraham, we we didn't only play together, but we got to be part of a faculty team in one of the universities where I used to work. So we really had this multi-side relationship as friends, as performers, and also collaborators in academia. So he's a very very dear friend, and it is one of those players that I always go back as a reference. Uh, I wish I could use him more in what I do. He's very busy. He keeps still very busy, uh, but I keep going back to his musical references, in terms of like how to place the right groove, the right amount of notes, the right placement of the notes. I learned a lot from Abraham in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Justo, how that relationship developed, as you said, from Abraham, I think you said?
Yes, yes. With Justo also we became very good friends. Justo is from Colombia, and Colombia and Venezuela, we are neighbors. But more than neighbors, Colombia and Venezuela used to be the same country. And so immediately we started like, hey, we're brothers, and the food is the same, and some of the expressions are the same. Uh, so we have this like great relationship, and then later we taught together at UCLA. So that was another part of our, so we used to play together, but also get together in the faculty meetings and, you know, portray another side of our. But yeah, Justo's a wonderful cat. Wonderful cat.
Excellent. And we're going to talk about the performance aspects of each of these in a minute, but I want to throw two more into the mix. Now, Dianne Reeves, I know you spent a significant period of time with, sort of 5 years or so. That I'm assuming was an even bigger role for you. Tell us about that period of time and what you took out of that.
Well, Dianne Reeves was certainly one of the highlights of my, not my career, but my story, my life story. Um, because we traveled the world for many, many years, around the world like a million times. And we developed a wonderful friendship. And before Diane, my experience playing with singers was that of allowing a safety blanket at all times for the singer. That was also my perception, because most of the singers I always play with, they wanted to have like, oh, can you give me that one chord? Can you give me that one phrase? So that was my approach to comping for singers. And then that's one of the funny things that happened immediately with Diane. It's like within the few first concerts, I noticed that she wanted to tell me something. It's like, well, what is it? And she said, you are always playing the same. It's like, well, yeah, because I want to make sure that everything is clear. It's like, no, don't do that. So that day she asked me, I want you to just, first of all, be free to set it up in a different way. But also, I want you to be free to take the song somewhere else if you feel like. So if it is a ballad, you can play that ballad in a million different ways. You can set the introduction in a million different ways. You can come from a 12-tone row and then, infer the tonality somehow and bam, there we are. Or just play a blues or just play like something. And then that day, my head pretty much exploded with freedom. The consequences of too much freedom were killing me. And I went like, oh my God. So every night was like, okay, here we go. Here we're gonna play, let's say, Misty for the hundredth time this tour. and I had to play it differently, and I had to set it up differently in a different meter so that was the school of Dianne Reeves for me. And you know, I think after Dianne, it that's around the same time that I read this book written by, I know you must know it, by Katie Werner, this book called Effortless Mastery, which is a wonderful book. Uh, Around that time, I read this book, and that book kind of deals with that, with the how to liberate yourself, free yourself, and embrace sound, embrace whatever path you take, and make it work. And that was a total liberation phase for me.
Absolutely, and Otmaro, even in my limited experience, that's Diane's approach seems incredibly unusual to me. So it sounded like at that stage it was unusual to you. Have you ever come across another singer that is that liberal in allowing you to drive or interpret the song?
No, no. But the truth is that after I played with Dianne, I would like to talk about another singer because,
Yes.
yeah, because it's an interesting contrast, but a total valid point of view nonetheless. After Dianne Reeves, I went on to play with Gino Vanelli.
Yes.
Which is an iconic, my childhood hero. The guy that merged pop, jazz, rock in such an organic way, and a mega singer with one of the biggest, most beautiful instruments, vocal instruments. And then Gino was doing his jazz tour. He went through a phase in which he took his songs and rearranged them in a jazz format with a jazz quintet with vibraphone and piano. It was beautiful, beautiful, and I thought I was coming from the Dianne Reeves experience, right? Or I was doing both, kind of like at the same time. But then I went like, okay, now I can do this. I can be free. And then Gino, it's not that he wouldn't hear the harmony. It's that he wanted to have the product solid. So because in his mind, Gino is a mega producer. So he already knows the sound in his head, all the every single passing note, everything was charted. So that was another eye opener because here in this tour, we're going to have to create the illusion of being free, but we're playing exactly the same notes every night. And it was a test for my memory because I usually don't exercise my memory. Uh, and then I had to really learn how to memorize a full show, make it sound like it's completely impromptu, and then every so often we would change the arrangements because he was concerned that if people listened to the show several times, they would find out that it was the same notes. So it was kind of like borderline psychological abuse because oh my god, now we have to relearn another show. But it was that. So it's like those are the things that make you grow as a professional. Is facing these challenges.
Exactly. And before I get you to choose a couple of other artists, Maro, the one I have to bring in the Australian angle, and that's Frank Gambale. Obviously, you've worked with Frank, I think, on a couple of albums, and he originated out of Australia, but I know has spent a lot of time in LA. Tell us about that relationship.
I cannot remember how we met. I've been trying to think about it because some people has asked me about that, and I don't remember who introduced us, how he got to know about me. But I'm glad he did because we became really, really, really good friends, almost family, while he was living in the United States. But when he got there, we were there when he got married, when he had his daughter. I mean, it's like family. But also, that's a super virtuoso that happens to be also a great composer.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't have a problem setting whatever I'm doing as a composer myself. I didn't have a problem setting that to aside in order to work with it. I'm not I'm not that in love with my music. You know, it might sound like a sin, but I truly don't. I mean, I love what I do, but I also love what I learn from other people even more because I learn their perspective. I learn how they use certain devices different than me. So I want to learn that. And Frank had this really interesting style of harmonic style that I learned a lot from. And so I didn't have a problem putting all my stuff in the back burner and playing with Simon. We did wonderful uh, time together, especially the last two projects, Natural High Trio with Alan Caron. Those were like such a highlight. We got to, again, travel the world with two of my best friends ever, and I'm playing some of the most complex but beautiful music. So
Yeah. No, amazing. And you just mentioned, Otmaro, about you quite happy to put your own preferences, in the back corner, which is a sign of a great collaborator. How often do you suffer from imposter syndrome or have low self-confidence? All of us as players go through phases. How do you manage times where you think, if, not that you're not up to it, but just where you struggle with your confidence?
well, we are musicians. We we have that little bug. We all have that little bug, and usually the guys that don't have that bug, you recognize them immediately, and those are the guys you don't want to play with. I don't want to play with a guy that says, "Oh man, I got it all solved." He's like, "No, well, next." Right? Yes, um, especially now. I'll be honest. We were talking about how the new generation gets this information so quickly and so in such an expedited manner. And at my age, we process things a lot slower, and our learning curve declines after a while. So sometimes, yeah, I think like, wow, I wish I had this facility to change or to adjust quicker. And then another part of me tells me, well, I think I can play a few notes, and people have told me that without just a few notes, they know it's me. They know they can recognize my touch, they can recognize a certain phrase, a certain way of voicing, and that is something that it has taken me my whole life. It's great when you achieve this in your 20s, but in my case, okay, I'm in my 60s, and now it I'm still developing this, but I'm glad it's happening. So when I feel like, wow, I wish I could do this, I could do that. I have to remind myself, well, but I have this, that I have this that has made the whole journey now makes sense. The whole amount of suffering and 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 enjoyment or whatever you call it, all the highs and lows. Now it all makes sense because at the end of all this time, I achieved this thing where I can just be myself and people will recognize the sound.
Yeah.
So at that point, I think that eases that feeling of not feeling like up to a task or a little bit out of place.
Yeah, no, great perspective. And I'm interested too, while I think of it, Otmar. I mean, are you the sort of person, can you ever envisage retiring from music, or this is a lifetime pursuit? You'll go until you drop?
Uh, Internally, I wish I could stay in music all my life. I don't think a musician ever retires from music. Um, Even the people that claim to have retired, they all keep their little studio, and it's like the old joke. They all go back and play with their toy soldiers. So they all have their little studios and they keep doing music. So that's not something that you can break away from so easily. Uh, I think the music business has made it so hard, and the future is so uncertain, that I understand why some people feel closer to taking that decision. I understand, but I haven't got there yet, quite yet.
Yeah. No, excellent answer. And so, Otmaro, I do want you to choose, and for the sake of our listeners and viewers that aren't aware of Otmaro's full discography, it literally runs into the hundreds. So never have we barely scratched the surface more than in this interview. So I'm just fascinated what you would call out as 2 or 3 artists, no matter how well known or not well known, that had a big impact on you, due to their musicality, just the collaboration itself, the hang, whatever it was.
Well, I'll tell you. I think there's three big kind of landmarks in this whole story, ongoing story. Um, Dianne Reeves.
Yes.
With Dianne, I was in my element. At the moment I did it, I was in my element. It was a crossover of music, multi-genre oriented, hybrid setup, acoustic piano, straight ahead, synthesizers, fusion, everything combined. Uh, John McLaughlin, although it was a very limited chapter, we did a tour and 2 albums together. But that absolutely blew my mind with regards to the understanding of his musical universe in terms of the linear conception, and his harmonic metric conception as well. Um, when I played with John McLaughlin, I had heard Mahavishnu, but I admitted at that point, I admitted to him, it's like I I was never really into it, deeper into it, because I didn't understand it. I was too young, so I enjoyed it, but I didn't understand it, and it wasn't until I played with him, I was already in my mid late 30s. Then it's like, oh, this is how he thinks about this. There's an internal thing going on. There's this scale that glues everything together. There's this other thing. So that's when I could really get into the depth of John's music. And I think of all the albums, I think The Heart of Things is one of his most beautiful albums. The compositions are gorgeous, and the playing is unbelievable by the band. So
with John's work, Otmaro, did you find that was one of the more complex rehearsal processes, either before recording or playing live? That there is so much in that music. Was that one of your more challenging gigs?
Okay, this might be a world premiere. I want to tell a story that not many people know. When John called me, he had a situation with Jim Beard. Rest in peace, my superhero. Um, and Jim Beard had to bail. He had another offer at the very last minute. So John was in the situation of having to find somebody to learn all this music that they developed together.
Wow.
Right? They developed it with a lot of time, and then all of a sudden he needs someone to jump in. So when he called me, I asked him, "Okay, do you have? I need you to send me some live tapes, live recordings. I have the album, the studio album and send me the charts. Well, there's a problem. We don't have charts. And this is, at that time, that was in 1997 or 98. There was no finale.
No.
So I think I can find some charts. So at this meanwhile, the time is running and I'm listening to the music, but I have no idea what's going on because Dennis Chambers is doing all these placements that I didn't understand where the one was, where the phrase started. I was really freaking out. And I really had to program. I wanted to program a set of sounds that would allow a fair transition between Jim Beard's sounds and because I was stepping in. I mean, I didn't want people to go like, "Oh, this guy sounds different." So I had to program sounds. And I wanted to program sounds, the same sounds in multiple units. So the same kind of like piano with a layer of bells and a modulator. I had to program in 3 different axes in case the rentals were not available. So I was really, really freaking out with lack of time. And then John sent me these charts that he had done with Logic. But Logic took the sound of the MIDI but didn't quantize the sound. So the charts were plagued with 30-second notes, rests, and it was like a torture to look at. It was, I don't know anybody that could have read that or even made sense out of that. So, but it gave me an idea of the notes. If I heard a scale, okay, here's that scale. So I will notate it again. Well, the story that most people don't know is that when I arrived to Monaco, we had one rehearsal.
Wow.
We had one rehearsal. And the next day was national TV, was Leverkusen Festival on TV. so
no pressure.
Yeah, so that I almost had a aneurysm that day during that rehearsal because, of course, I didn't want to look like I was glued to the charts. So yeah, it was very, very stressful. But after that day, after we did that TV, which is, by the way, is the only document from that tour. After that, everything was smooth sailing because, like, okay, I already pushed the hardest. So now it's like smooth sailing from now.
That's amazing. Yeah, look, that's absolutely amazing and well done.
Yeah, and then after McLaughlin, I've done all these amazing, collaborations. I play with Lee Rittenauer, which is a joy to work with. Lee is such a wonderful musical guy that in one single concert we go and play Brazilian music and we play jazz straight ahead and fusion. And, yeah. But it's not until I started working 8 years ago with Protocol with Simon that I get that fresh infusion of like a healthy challenge, because it's now I'm back into the multi-keyboard saddle kind of situation, the programming, the choreography of the hands, the triggering stuff, and most importantly, getting into the music, complex meters, and understanding it enough to solo and to improvise and to interact normally.
Yeah.
So that's a new challenge. So that has been the last 8 years for me.
And let's talk a little bit about Protocol. I'm a major fan myself. I mean, let's just talk briefly, technically, about your keyboard rig, because I can imagine that on its own is quite a complex setup.
Yes and no. I mean, it is complex if you compare it to the average uh, plug-in oriented, computer-based thing where you have a single controller and then you have everything mapped. Of course, I mean nothing beats that in terms of practicality. But as I told you, I grew up with knobs and I grew up really having access to a single machine at a time. So for many years when I was working with Dianne, I used to talk a lot to George Duke because they were related, and George kept like telling me that, oh, you should start using plugins, you should start. But I noticed that every time I saw George on stage, something happened with his plugins, something
Yeah.
happened with his computer. So I it's like I didn't know. I mean, he had a whole team of people that made that situation like a non-situation. But in my case, I'm just by myself. If something happens on stage, I'm the one that is going to freak out. I'm the one that is going to have to reboot, like ask the audience for forgiveness and all that. So I didn't want to go through this. So I like when I can have my different keyboards, and I know exactly if something fails in one, I know exactly where to go to the other one. Uh, so I can have at one, I can have, of course, it's a choreography of two hands plus all the magic that you can do with sustain pedals,
Yeah.
volume pedals, and triggering a sample, an occasional sample.
Yeah. And that's probably a good segue, Otmaro, to a train wreck story across all of your collaborations and probably more in a live sphere. Has something gone spectacularly wrong that you can look back and laugh about now?
Many, many times. Many, many, many times. Uh, you know that I've compiled some of these funny stories, um, and someday I'm gonna release a book
Please.
because I've gone through some really embarrassing situations, and now I look back and I laugh. But one of them, one time I was playing for a singer in a show in which we had to follow a very iconic singer. And then this happened in Havana, Cuba, in the Karl Marx Theater. It was packed, it was like thousands of people. So this iconic singer was singing, and then the curtain came down, and we had to change bands really, really quick. And then for the next act, with the singer that I was working with, and that is exactly what I did. What we did, the curtain came down, and then I went to the piano and I was on position. And then when the curtain went up, it was the same singer that was singing before. The audience asked for another song, an encore. And then this lady looks back, she turns to her pianist, and her pianist is not there, it's me. Imagine it was like a 15 seconds of silence, of deadly silence, until we figure out that, okay, there's nothing we can do here. So the only way that is going to get us out of here is for you to start humming something, and then I'll go along with it.
What?
And that's how we got it.
That would easily be one of the best train wreck stories ever. I've
And
never
that's train
heard
wreck.
that.
That's like that's one of those things that you have nightmares with when you're a performer. That's the quintessential performer nightmare: being in a stage and not knowing what you're gonna do.
That is amazing, Otmaro. That is one of the best. Oh dear. Yeah, I think I will now have nightmares about that. That's great. And probably while we're being reflective, and this doesn't have to be a serious answer as such, but I mean, looking back over your career to date, are there any musical regrets? And I'm not talking about not getting on with people, but just are there things you wish you could have done differently, or you're not that sort of person?
No, not at all. Not at
Yeah.
all. And honestly, I can say that every gig that I've played in my life has enriched me somehow.
Yeah.
We sometimes we do gigs for money, and that also enriches us. Financially, no, but seriously, the gigs that I've invested my heart into, I no regrets. I always find something that I'm going to learn from this and make me better.
Yeah.
So
No, great perspective. And now we have the dreaded Desert Island Discs question, Otmaro. So if you had to choose 5 albums that have had a big impact on your life, what would they be?
wow, well, I'm a big, of course. I think I would include Chick Corea's "Now She Sings, Now She Sobs." There's no way not to include any of Keith Jarrett's from any phase of Keith Jarrett, from the earlier like concerts to whatever standards. Um, I would include some uh, orchestral Ravel. I would include some Lyle Mace, and I would include any of Herbie Hancock's explorations, harmonic explorations.
Nice. There's
I
5.
like,
You
yeah.
rattled them off very effectively. And if you don't mind, I'll curate the ones you've just said, Ravel Orchestra. I'll choose one of the more relevant ones. That's perfect. No,
Yeah,
thank you.
Ravel, I'm a big sucker for Samuel Barber too. But
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. No, thank you. And then our final question, Otmar, is a 10-parter. It's what we call our quick fire 10. So 10 short and sharp questions with short and sharp answers. So due to some serious crime that you've committed, you've been sentenced to 6 months in a tribute band. What tribute band are you choosing?
Punishment? Oh, that would be Bad Bunny.
Okay, nice. Yeah, great. Before a gig, Otmar, and I know this will vary depending on what you're playing, but what is an important pre-gig ritual to you? So what do you need to do to feel settled before a gig?
I never have the luxury of warming up before a gig, but if I can have it my way, I would have at least a few moments by myself just to stretch.
Yeah, great one. If you hadn't been a musician, what do you think your career choice would have been? Would it have been biology related?
It would have been biology, it would have been acting, or it would have been magic, which is another
Nice.
thing that I do for fun. It's like, well, I'm like semi professional or a little more than amateur, I would say. But my magic took a lot of my last 20 years.
Yeah, amazing. Love it. If it's possible, and I think it is nearly impossible in your case with your career, but is there a favourite tour you've ever done?
I would say Dianne Reeves.
Yeah, it's hard to go past
Yeah.
that. And is there a favourite gig you've ever done, a one-off gig that has really stood out to you?
Oh, a one-off gig. I did this thing with Bill Evans,
Well,
Randy Brecker, and Simon Phillips.
yeah, wow. Say no more.
That was incredible. But it was like just like one, and
Yeah.
never again.
Yeah, wow. I'm in awe. Is there a favourite city you like playing in?
Japan, Tokyo.
Yeah, yep, that makes sense.
I have to say, I have never been to Australia.
We need to change that.
And I have heard wonderful things from musicians that perform in Australia. So I cannot, of course, include that. But so far, Tokyo takes.
Yeah. Tokyo is I'd argue is what the second capital of jazz. It's amazing, and we definitely need to change getting you to Australia. Do you have a favourite music documentary or movie?
Round Midnight.
Yeah, great. Name one thing you'd like to see that were invented that would make your life as a keyboard player easier.
Oh, the keyboard carrying robots.
Yes, I love it. That's great. I second that motion. And outside of music, Otmaro, is there a favourite non-musical activity or hobby? What do you like to do to keep grounded outside of music?
Magic.
Of course, yeah. That's
yeah.
And look, I think magic is one of many terms that could be applied to your career to date. Your playing is magic, your attitude is magic, your education is magic, and I know I cannot thank you enough for taking the time. And just for the sake of our listeners and viewers, this has been a long time coming, not because Otmaro has refused to come on the show. I only approached him recently and he didn't hesitate. Otmaro, it was Ruben Valtierra that said probably 2.5 years ago, you have to have Otmaro on the show because we've spoken with Ruben and it's a thrill to actually finally get to speak with you.
Wow, Ruben is a dear friend of many, many, many years. And I'm gonna now find the moment to thank him profusely for this.
No, pleasure is all ours, and thank you so much, Otmaro. It's been an absolute honor.
Thank you so much.
And there we have it. Again, hope you enjoyed that. What an amazing amount of insights Otmaro provided. And I did love the fact, and we alluded to it into the interview, that the amazing Simon Phillips was there at the time. Otmaro was in the middle of some work he's doing with Simon, and seeing him walk across the background was an added bonus. So, yeah, look, I just can't thank Otmaro enough for his time. He's an absolute force of nature, one of the best players I've ever seen, and just can't wait to see what's coming up next. So, yeah, a huge thank you again. A huge thank you to you, as always, for listening, and also to our gold and silver supporters. So the amazing Dave Bryson team at the musicplayer.com forums. Thank you, Dave, and the Keyboard Corner in particular. It's such a great forum to hang out on and talk keyboards and related issues. The amazing Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you so much, as always, Tammy. The brilliant Mike Wilcox at Midnight Mastering. If you're creating your own music and need someone really, really good to mix and master it, Mike is your guy at midnightmastering.com. And last but definitely not least, the brilliant, amazing, likeable, great Derry Evans from the sunny land of Wales. Big shout out to you as always, Derry, and hope you're doing well. Again, thank you all for listening. We'll be back all too soon in a couple of weeks. And until then, keep on playing.